So my name is Ben Scher, and I'm a doctoral researcher at the University of Oxford. And I actually grew up in Vancouver, Canada, where I worked in overdose prevention centres for 3 years before coming back to the UK and starting my PhD. And in the PhD, my research is looking at the experience of people who use drugs and access overdose prevention centres, but in 3 different countries, and looking at the different models of OPCs that exist around the world. So started off in Birmingham, here where we are right now doing this interview, where there are no overdose prevention centres, and so the focus there was looking at is there a need for centres to be opened over here. The second was in Vancouver, where in the downtown east side there's I think 10 overdose prevention centres now within a 2-kilometre radius, ranging from low barrier peer-led models all the way up to very highly medicalized models. So you've got a full range of services there. And then the third location was Athens in Greece, where about 2 years ago now they opened the country's first sanctioned site, which again is a highly medicalized model. And what we found through this research was really what people want out of an OPC is the ability to feel heard and welcome and safe. They want a space where they trust the staff, they trust the people around them, and the mechanism of the OPC which facilitated this was really the involvement of peers in the design and delivery of the service. So in Vancouver, for example, you had services where it was a peer who would welcome the client at the door, who would sit with them while they were using, who would talk to them about injecting advice, who would then sit with them in the aftercare process. And really the clinical member of staff would only get involved in the case of an overdose or if they were really required. And the peers were trained in terms of speaking about all the other services that were on offered, so the peers were able to connect people to housing and healthcare services. And then moving on to the research we did in more medicalized facilities, we saw that when there was a lack of peers within the service, there was actually still a fairly large number of people who were still injecting in the street who weren't coming in. So really kind of the major finding from this research was people want to feel safe, they want to trust the service, and involving peers in that is kind of the crucial piece of the puzzle. And it's not saying that all services need to be entirely low barrier. It's brilliant when there is investment into OPCs and they can have more of those medicalized services. All it requires from that point is a really small tweak and to add peers in. And yeah, that's how you maximize engagement and maximize the benefits for people in the community who really, really could benefit from an OPC.
Thank you, Ben. And just after your incredible research and travels through Greece and Vancouver, obviously, and in the UK here, what gives you a sense of hope about the future of OPCs or drug consumption rooms in the world?
Yeah, definitely. So there are a few things that give me hope. Having done all of this primarily qualitative research, spending a lot of time interviewing folks who use OPCs, doing focus groups with people who use OPCs, really kind of the benefits that people get from it beyond kind of the clinical metrics, so like engagement with treatment or engagement with housing or less wounds, for example. All of these things are super important. But beyond those metrics, what gives me hope is kind of the message from people that coming into an OPC makes them feel cared for by their government. Coming into an OPC makes them feel like they're a part of society, and that they are valued as community members, regardless of whether they are currently in treatment, currently using drugs or not. They're someone's brother, someone's sister, someone's kid, someone's family member or friend, and an OPC is really symbolic. It actually goes beyond those public health metrics that we're so used to hearing about. So just really kind of going to these 3 places and hearing those stories of how these facilities make people feel, that gives me hope that if we can get those messages across, that will encourage policymakers to open more of these services. The second piece that gives me hope is actually we are seeing these services spread around the world. When I started this research, there was only 11 countries that had OPCs. 4 years later, they're now 18, with countries like the US opening up OPCs, which back then when I started, you'd never in a million years think that the US would open up services. So I think that it's catching on, the benefits of these services, not just in places where there's high numbers of overdoses. Obviously responding to overdoses is really important, but actually anywhere where you have a community of people who are using drugs and don't have a safe space to go, who aren't ready to engage in treatment yet, an OPC is needed, whether there are overdoses or not. And there's some countries that have really taken that on board. So Iceland, for example, where there aren't high numbers of overdoses, they now have OPCs because they've recognized the benefits that this service can offer to people beyond responding to overdose. And so I'm very hopeful for the future. More and more countries are catching on to the value of these services. And yeah, I'm hopeful.
Good on you, Ben, and all the best for your doctorate and postdoctoral work.
Thank you very much, Judy.